Okay, so the point is that one thing Shakespeare does better than anybody else is when he has an idea. Again, we talked about ideas as one of the five key terms. When he has an idea, like say Prospero is a colonialist, he then thinks it through in several different areas. The King of Naples sold his daughter for political power to an African king. Um, Also, the guy's empire building, just like Prospero. Aeneas, in an ancient poem, is mentioned in here, was empire building and ignoring romantic relationships, just like the king ignored the romantic desires of his daughter in order to form political marriage. Aeneas ignores the romantic overtures of Dido to go build his empire. So the point is that whenever Shakespeare has an idea, he elaborates it in several different areas, and it's really interesting to see Shakespeare. Once he has one idea, colonialism, it pops up in lots of different areas in the play and makes it one of the things that makes Shakespeare interesting to think about. Um, so let's go talk about this a little bit more. Um, all right, so let's get to the end of this. So the guys are complaining, like, all of us, right? He says, we all kneeled to you and importuned otherwise. We didn't, by all of us, right? We didn't want your daughter to get married to that African king. And the fair soul herself, she didn't want to marry him. And now we've lost your son, I fear, forever. Milan and Naples have more widows in them. The fault's your own. Um, and then Gonzalo tells this guy to calm the fuck down. My lord Sebastian, the truth you speak doth lack some gentleness and time to speak it in. Meaning, like, yes, you're right, but this is not the time to mention it when the king is crying over his son being dead, to be like, oh, by the way, it's all your fault because you sold your daughter to an African king. Like, yes, it's true, but it's not a nice time to say it. And he says, you rub the sore when you should bring the plaster, meaning you're making it worse when you should be putting medicine on it. And they talk about the weather, and then we get this fascinating little bit, another one of those my favorite little bits. Gonzalo, again, this sort of old man who likes to sort of ramble on and on. Gonzalo says, had I plantation of this isle, my lord, and they make fun of him because they think he's an idiot. But Gonzalo's imagining, if it was my job to like control this island and plant things and create my own island, um, um, he says, and I were the king on it, what would I do? So again, the old man's trying to change the subject, trying to be nice, trying to be sweet. And he says, if I was king on this island, what would I do with it? Because he's thinking about Aeneas, who went to Rome to found the Roman Empire. And he says, if I founded an empire in this island, what would I do? And it's an interesting response. Um, they say escape being drunk for want of wine, because they're just bitching at him, and they just say you wouldn't be able to be drunk because you don't have any wine. And then Gonzalo, because remember he's saying, like, the key thing to remember, he says, and we're the king on it. Had I the plantation of this isle, my lord, and they say mean things and he ignores them. Had I the plantation of this isle, my lord, and were the king on it, what would I do? And then he says what he would do if he was the king on the island. It's a really neat speech. Gonzalo says, in the commonwealth I would by contraries execute all things. For no kind of traffic would I admit, no name of magistrate. Letters should not be known. Riches, poverty, and use of service, none. Contract, succession, born, bound of land, tilth, vineyard, none. No use of metal, corn, or wine, or oil. No occupation, all men idle. And women too, but innocent and pure, no sovereignty. So it's a list. He's listing off what he wants. He says, if I was the king on this island, what would I do with it? He says, let me tell you what I would do with it if I were king on it. He's trying to change the subject to something nice. He says, if I were king of this island, what would I do with it? And he lists off all the things he would do. And what he wants to do is basically, Gonzalo thinks all the things society sets up are actually bad. And so he says all these things. He's going to get rid of all this stuff that makes people bad. And so he says what he's going to do. So he says, for starters, no kind of traffic would I admit. Which really, the traffic here means like trading with other cultures, right? He wouldn't get involved in buying and selling shit, because money's the root of all evil. No name of magistrate. So he doesn't want to have people have fancy titles like lords and ladies, because that causes jealousy and all kinds of problems. Letters should not be known. He says, you know what? Books cause too many problems. Maybe if I had a perfect island, people wouldn't be reading. He says, riches, poverty, use of service, none. He's going to get rid of money. No money. Contract, succession, born, band of lound, tith, vineyard, none. Because these are things that people fight over. Contracts, succession means, once the king dies, who should be the new king? Land, vineyards. He doesn't want to have any of the kind of stuff, the property and the titles that people in society fight over. He's going to get rid of that stuff, and then there'll be no fighting. No use of metal, corn, wine, or oil. He says these things cause trouble. People fight over this kind of stuff, right? Swords and alcohol and he says all these kinds of, these are the kind of crops and things people fight over. No occupation. He says, why should anybody have to have a job? If I had a perfect island and I was king on it, no occupation. Nobody has a job. We're not going to have money. We're not going to trade with other societies. We're not going to read upsetting things in books. We're not going to have jobs. He says, if I were king on this island, it would just be peaceful, happy people just relaxing and having a nice time. No titles, no rich people, no poor people, no trading with other cultures, no reading books. It's just going to be just hang out and relax all day. And then he hits a problem. He says, men idle all and women too, but innocent and pure. So no one has anything to do, but people will be good because they won't have all these, again, money, property, the things people feel jealous over, they fight over, they murder each other. He says, I'm getting rid of all that. And then he says, no sovereignty. Now, no sovereignty means he's not going to have any kings. Because again, he doesn't want power and titles and over people. He wants everybody to be equal and nobody to have jobs. Everybody's just going to hang out and be happy if he had this island. And Sebastian makes a mean joke, but he's right. He says, and yet he would be king on it. And Antonio says, the later end of his commonwealth forgets the beginning. Now that is a great. Normally I'd put you into groups and have you discuss that passage, but we don't have groups right now. It's a great example of irony. Because remember at the very beginning, he said, if I were king on this island, you know what I would do with it? I would get rid of money. I would get rid of fancy titles. I would get rid of special property that people fight over all the time. I wouldn't make people work. They could all just relax. There'd be no kings. You see the problem? And then they make fun of him. They say the end of his commonwealth forgets the beginning. Because at the beginning, he said, if I were king, I would get rid of money, jobs, property, kings. Hey, wait a minute. See the irony? He said, if I were king, I would get rid of kings. It's irony because he's an old man and he's a little stupid and he's not paying attention to what he's saying. It's a very simple irony, right? There's a contrast. If he was king, the only person who would have the power to get rid of kings would be a king. That's irony. It's contrast. And there's a bigger irony. There's a bigger contrast here that has to do with empire building, which is the idea that if you want to build a perfect society, somebody's got to be in charge. But in a perfect society, nobody would be in charge. You wouldn't have rulers bossing you around in a perfect society. And so it speaks to something about empire building and power. The idea that you have to have power to change society. But what if you want to change society into something that gives power back to the people? Well, you can't because you have to be king to make it happen. So it underlies the fact that even though couldn't we build a perfect society? Well, the only person that could build it would be somebody very powerful. But one of the things that makes society perfect is people wouldn't be more powerful than each other. They'd be equals. This is, again, Shakespeare returning to empire building and the paradoxes, the ironies involved with empire building. I'm arguing that Prospero is a metaphor for the kinds of kings that go to other places and take over, like Columbus coming to America and killing all the Native Americans and taking over, because he wants money, because he wants power. So Shakespeare is thinking about these things, and it's a great little detail. It's a great little detail that you can't found the perfect society. You have to start with imperfection. You have to start with real-world political power. You have to have a king who says, I'm going to change. I'm powerful. I can change. King needs an army. And then you're like, we're going to build a land of peace. You're going to build a land of peace with a king and an army? That sounds like a problem, because it seems like a land of peace wouldn't have an army, wouldn't have a king bossing everybody around. So again, the point is that Prospero is expanding his political power by coming to this other land and creating something. Aeneas expands his political power by sailing, ignoring love, and sailing to found the Roman Empire. The king Alonso is expanding his political power with his daughter married to this guy. Gonzalo goes on this whole rambling thing about how he'd create the perfect society that wouldn't have any kings in it, and the way he would do it is by being king. So Shakespeare, it's like 4 different times that Shakespeare comes back to the idea, remember ideas is one of the key terms, of empire and power and slaves and control and land and colonialism. Okay, picking up in the last video for the day.